Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Torcom Talk. Super excited about this week's guest, Brian Dunning. For those of you who don't know, he is Ben's most popular podcast host. He is the host of the podcast Skeptoid, which he has been doing for 13 years and has over 200,000 active weekly users per week. Wow. And basically his show, if you haven't listened to it, you should, but it's a 12 to 15 minutes of breaking down some myths or some facts, whether it's vaccines or the effects of G5, which we get into, flat earth, Bigfoot, all that kind of stuff. So we ended up having an amazing conversation where we honed most of it in onto what's going on in Bend and then a bit of what's going on in the entire world when it comes to some of this stuff, like the people protesting for G5 towers in front of that school, G5, 5G, whatever. Mitch was just telling me I did it wrong, but we're going to roll it. Don't edit this. And everything doesn't have to be perfect. And besides, he's also an author on a number of different books, and he is constantly brought in to be a expert on all those type of science shows, whether it's on aliens or the Grand Canyon or Nat Geo and all that sort of stuff. He's on countless ones of those. So really excited that we had him here, and we have him here live. So please enjoy this wide range of conversation where I learn a lot, and I hope you guys do, with Brian Dunning. So, yeah, Brian, finding what you were just talking about, the rising denial of vaccinations, to be quite fascinating. That, and there's other rising denials that are fascinating as well.
Flat Earth
Is exactly one. That one absolutely fascinates me. The documentary on Netflix, did you watch that?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, the one thing that I found very intellectually stimulating for me was not what they were trying to prove, but the idea, what's the word I'm looking for? The study of how humans come together and basically end up having tribe mentality is how I was looking at that. I was like, this is kind of the same way and it doesn't matter what the movement is, it's just a feeling of being to belong. Like Nazism, for example, when that started, it's just like, wow, this is pretty awful, but everybody else is doing it, and I feel like I belong to this. And then even when they get disproven towards the end, like at the very end when they're rolling the credits and that, and the guy's just like, science proved hard that, like, sorry, the Earth has curvature to it. Your own study you set up just proved to you that the Earth has curvature. And he goes, huh. And in the credits, she's like, actually, here's the thing. There's all sorts of problems because that idea, that belonging, the community, his career, because that became that guy's career at that point, all those things were in jeopardy. And he wasn't willing to let that go.
No, I mean, people get super emotionally invested, psychologically invested, emotionally invested in whatever their idea is. Yeah, and it becomes very hard to shake. One of the concepts that always comes up in doing what I do, and all science communicators, I've got many friends who do the same kind of work. And we always get charged with having a closed mind. Mm-hmm. And there's this argument of open-mindedness versus closed-mindedness. And to me, it seems like a willingness to change your mind based on new information would be open-minded. Whereas clinging to your idea no matter what information pops up, that should be considered closed-mindedness.
But it's reversed.
It seems to be reversed, because when you follow the data, when you report what science experiments have shown, you're accused of being closed-minded, because you're not accepting this idea that, just whatever it is that maybe doesn't agree with the science, and science hasn't caught up with it yet. So you're just not being open-minded enough.
And that'd be the case in Flat Earth, and in the case that, Flat Earth, that's one thing. Because I don't think it really harms anybody if people believe the Earth is flat. Like, people aren't physically harmed from that. Like, me believing, if I don't believe the Earth is flat, but if I thought that, boom, that's Earth right there, you're not physically harmed by that.
Yeah.
Vaccination, though, and not some just people on the rise of not vaccinating their kids. Now you are harming other people.
It's the same with grandma believes that she can communicate with her poodle psychically. I mean, that belief is that's a harmless belief, arguably. However, it's when you start accepting things like, oh, this is a harmless belief, so it's okay. Let's focus on other things. You're missing the fact that you're enabling thought processes that are broken and that are going to extend to other pseudosciences like vaccine belief. When we look at the people who hold any one of these really far out beliefs like flat earth, you always find through surveys, you always find that they believe all the other weird stuff as well.
Like 9/11 conspiracy.
They'll be heavy into conspiracy theories. That's something that we see all the time. You know, it turns out
which would
that,
lead to vaccinations, I suppose.
Yeah. It's all wrapped up. It turns out that people have kind of like a
5G,
which we'll get to, I'm sure. People have like this thermometer, and they're for how far out the theory is, and we all have the threshold that we set. And we tend to find that people believe everything below the threshold and nothing above the threshold. So it is possible to say, well, I believe that 9/11 was an inside job, but flat Earth, that's crazy. But some people, their threshold is up there higher, and they do accept flat Earth, and you can almost guarantee that they're going to be 9/11 truthers and all of this other stuff as well.
So, but then how could that come around and then harm? Like, because if somebody believes 9/11, if somebody believes flat Earth, that same person, would still think, well, I'm still not being harmed by that and believing that. At what point do you think we get to that threshold of, well, now people are getting hurt?
Well, someone sitting in their house believing weird things, that doesn't hurt anyone.
Yeah.
But not everyone is sitting in their house. Sometimes people go out and act on their beliefs. I mean, we had the Pizzagate guy goes running around shooting up a restaurant because he had this extreme belief in conspiracy theories. That's the kind of thing that can happen. I mean, obviously that's a rare and isolated incident, but vaccine denial, that's definitely covered in this umbrella. That's fairly low on the threshold. So we see a lot of people embracing that, and that does directly result in deaths.
So how that's been on the rise lately. So the anti-vax, both. Well, what I'm amazed about was that you were just saying that the anti-vax movement, the denial of vaccinations being a helpful thing, and more parents not vaccinating their kids is on the rise. Correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So I knew it was a thing like a few years ago, but I thought, I don't study this stuff like you do, but I would just think, well, common sense of kids getting the measles left and right. And I heard this story of this one kid, I forgot what the disease was called, but they had to amputate his arms and legs because this rare disease like that happened because he wasn't vaccinated. And I was just like, okay, this stuff is starting to happen, but, and parents are still like, yeah, I know there's measles outbreaks, but you're not getting vaccinated. How is that still on the rise? How is that movement still like, this isn't talking about the earth being flat. This is your kid getting sick.
So there's a lot of answers to that question. Excuse me. And to me, this is what's really interesting about what I do. It's not what the belief is versus what the science says. That's fairly humdrum, but when you get into the sociology and the psychology of how and why we believe and how information spreads, to me, that's the really interesting part of this topic.
Yeah.
And there's a relatively new field of study called moral foundations theory. Okay. And an easy way to look at this is to say why conservatives tend to believe this set of things and why liberals tend to believe this set of things in many cases that are in direct conflict with each other. Well, you can't say half the people in the country are stupid and wrong. That's obviously a false statement. So if everyone is generally right and everyone is generally wanting to believe the right thing and wanting to do and be good, which is, I believe, is true, then we've got to have some explanation for how they can believe such diametrically opposed things. And that's kind of where moral foundations theory comes from. With vaccine ingredients, using that as an example to kind of explain how a vaccine denial, using it as an example to explain moral foundations theory in simple terms. We look at the moral underpinnings of why people are hesitant about vaccines.
What are they?
And it comes down to two fields, basically. One is the idea of purity, and these are terms that were developed by the researchers who were writing this. Yeah, which is natural things. We don't want artificial chemicals pumped into our bodies.
Yeah, whole organic movement and all that stuff. Got it.
So purity is a moral foundation of vaccine denial. And the other one is liberty. We don't want the government telling us that we have to inject our kid. We don't want the government telling us things that we have to do, medical procedures we have to follow. And so these are the two things that we find most common throughout vaccine denial people.
Yeah, they probably also believe in 9/11 then too.
In many cases, because you can see that some of these same moral foundations apply. And so what we need to do, and what my job is,
definitely applies.
Certainly liberty, What my job then as a science communicator is to find arguments based on these same moral foundations that these people might be willing to embrace. For example, if I was going to try and speak with a parent who won't vaccinate their kid in using their language, terms that they're likely to accept, I might, going for the purity argument, I might say, hey, if your kid is vaccinated, that means he's naturally immune to all these diseases, and you'll never have to take him to the hospital to get, chemical treatment for the measles or whatever like that. Because once you're vaccinated, of course, you are then naturally immune to this condition. So I'm not saying that's the best argument. I'm just saying that's an example of one way you can frame that using moral foundations theory. And then for the liberty one, kind of the same way. Once you're vaccinated, you're never going to have to go to the hospital for measles. You can stay home. You're not going to have to go to some government-run hospital with a corrupt healthcare system and all this stuff.
For the measles.
So you can arguably you have a better chance of persuading them with those kind of arguments than you would by simply showing them the science.
I watched this pro-vax and anti-vax debate on Middle Ground. They did this thing where it's well done, where they had like pediatricians, other doctors, a parent against, and they were the pro-vax against the anti-vax, which were all just a bunch of moms that were really upset about the whole thing. And they were adamant about their position on it. And it was a very civil thing, but their passion behind something that they didn't even have a lot of evidence behind. So these doctors are basically saying, hey, here's the facts. Like, I've seen what happens when there's anti-vax, and that's where I got the example of the kid that needed his limbs amputated. I've seen these measles outbreaks. I've seen all this stuff because of this movement that's coming up. And then the mom, on the other hand, is just like, you don't understand how my daughter was affected. She had a seizure, and she thinks it's correlated. It might be, but they're saying like, well, that can happen out of 1 out of 3 million in cases. There are side effects, but it's 1 out of 3 million. And then they just start yelling at him like, that's a made up number. You're making it up. I was like, no, it's not made up. That's what it statistically is. And so I'm just watching this angerment, and I started thinking of this fascinating book called it's from Hans Rosling. I forget the name of it, but
until you said his name, I could have told you the name of the book. I've got it actually on my bedside table right now.
But he talks about all these. So Hans Rosling is a great book that tells us to not be so afraid of everything. Is basically the thing. Like the media, the world basically tells us that everything's falling apart. Everything is a crapshoot. The world is the worst it's ever been. Oh my God, Trump's in power. Everything's going to hell. That sort of mentality. And Hans goes through and basically says, okay, over the past 100 years. Child mortality, which is the point, there's a lot of things that have been getting a lot better, incredibly better. But child mortality used to be, I forget the exact stat. Maybe can you look it up, Mitch, on the child mortality rates, how much it declined, what it was in the early 1900s compared to today. Yeah. I think in the 19th century, it was 1 out of 5 of your kids, or it was 3 out of 5. It was something ridiculous.
Yeah,
would die.
Horrific number.
Dead before they were 5. That's why people had so many kids, because a lot of them would die. And that was throughout the history of the world.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden we come up with these vaccinations. Oh, I'm sorry that the government says you should do this because kids were dying at an alarming rate. And now infant mortality rate and child mortality rate is like 1%, not even. It's like less than that. It's like 0.5 or something. If you look up Hans Rosling statistics on that, Mitch, you might be able to find it. Or actually,
Oh, we got a screen right here. Look at this.
yeah,
Is this
that's
Can we-
number
can we
child.
go back from earlier than 1990.
Yeah,
Although even that's pretty impressive right there.
that is impressive. Yeah, we want to go to.
It's gone down by half since 1990.
That's because those technologies, those vaccines, are getting to third world nations.
Yeah.
Weird. If you look up.
I'm guessing a lot of this is hunger issues as well, with probably the new rice strains and drought-resistant crops are probably responsible for a lot of these. So starvation and not just disease.
Factfulness. That's the name of the book.
Yes, thank you.
Check out check out Factfulness. I'll pop it up. So how do we go down this road? Vaccinations. Oh, so and I was sitting there just kind of dumbfounded from this, like, that, like, and both of the three women on this thing were like, we are incredibly educated on this, and it's what they both claimed a lot, which I don't doubt them. I think they are. I just doubt where they get their facts from. But I mean, throughout your incredible studies, you have to be seeing the headline news of like measles popping up all over the nation when that wasn't ever a thing. Well, it was a thing, but it wasn't a thing in my lifetime. And so it goes on that denial thing. So they're looking at the liberty, because one of them was saying, you're right, was going off of like the mandate, not wanting the government to basically tell you what to do. She also was having a problem with having doctors that met their kid for only 10 minutes. Her point was, you've only met with my kid because, the fast doctor points, which she has a point. In today's world, like, unless it's not where your doctor knows you really well, the kid sees him for 10, 15 minutes and he's out, and the nurse got the blood pressure, and that's about it. And so she's just like, in those 10 minutes, you don't know your kid as well as I do. And I know you know some stuff, but I know better. And I was just like,
Yeah, mommy wisdom is a kind of a huge problem.
yeah, but she has a point though. I mean,
Yeah, that's a point, but those are two different points.
Yeah.
Doctors don't spend a lot of time with patients. That's something that applies to many doctors, absolutely not all doctors. And that is a problem. And that is something that's an increasing focus in medical schools is, hey, you've got to have a better bedside manner, your customer service aspect. We need to do better on that. But that doesn't mean that medical science is wrong, and therefore you should go to a naturopath.
I completely.
And that's the
I
problem. That's where
agree.
it leads to.
Yeah, I completely agree. But I was just like, I was seeing where her
we
thoughts
go.
can come from. Yeah,
Look at that. Look at that
it's
graph.
amazing, right?
So that's going into the future though a bit. If you look at the bottom.
Well, that's fine. Look if you go to today,
Yeah, we're not that
2000.
bad right now.
Yeah, if you go to 2016 in that area, we're basically at the highlight of this curve. And that's coming down from, let's see. So what are the three child mortality, and we have weighted average,
Gapminder,
just
different data sets.
so
They
you
track
on
pretty well.
population. Yeah. So from all the data sets we're showing, when do you think vaccines were started to be widely introduced?
Oh, let's see. We've got all the. I did a whole episode on that.
And this is relevant, by the way, to Ben, because if you're driving down our freeway, or whatever you want to call that thing, the bypass, there's a big thing that says "Vax for that." And there's
Yeah.
a big campaign.
Yeah.
And so I know it's prevalent here
Which I
because
appreciate. That's
because
great.
the hospital decided to put out a big ad, a giant billboard, which isn't cheap, to say, hey, you should probably check this out because this curve exists for a reason.
Looking at about circa 1900 is where it really starts to drop. Let's see what. So the first vaccine was just about 1800, which was the smallpox vaccine. However, people had been doing kind of a homegrown version of that for about 1,000 years. Chinese discovered that grinding up month-old smallpox scabs and administering the powder nasally would produce a mild case of the disease, but the person would always recover and would then be immune.
People would
So
go and snort freaking
You
smallpox.
snort someone else's ground up smallpox.
That's how you have a
down.
great time in Vegas.
So that people were doing that, and then it was about 1800 when a guy actually figured out how to synthesize that and make it safe and clean and everything. And then then we just kind of saw a gradual. Really, in the 1900s is when we started having all the other vaccines appeared, more and more again. Of course, the most famous was Jonas Salk with the polio vaccine.
Yeah, do you know around what year that was? Because kids are having polio now
circa
too.
1940. That's probably right, within plus or minus 10 years.
Yeah, so that's when that graph starts dipping down. I mean, you have all these vaccines. There's other things contribute to, is like hunger and things of that nature. But measles kill, and
They do.
yeah, and so does polio, turns out. So you have something that it makes it so where your kid doesn't need to die, but you're like, no, I need to have my liberty and not be told what to do, and need to make sure that my kid is organic. Other claims I see a lot of when I was researching a bit was like autism was popping up a lot, where they're pointing the finger at that. Which does bring up a question. I don't think it's from vaccines, but I am curious as to, have you ever done a show as to why the rise in autism?
Yeah, there has not been a rise in autism. There's been a rise in autism diagnoses.
That's what I always thought it was going to be, kind of
entirely
like
due to that.
ADHD and ADD. Well, that was actually made up. That was a term that they made up, which was...
There used to be a huge stigma around any kind of a mental condition at all.
Yeah, you didn't
and
want
so
to admit.
people didn't report them.
Right.
There was no data on
Yeah.
people who had even anything from a low IQ to being a complete vegetable. It just simply wasn't reported, and we didn't track it. So the incidence was basically zero. Mm-hmm. And then as we started to learn about these things, and then as the stigma started to go down, and then in the last really 3 to 4 decades, the autism spectrum was defined, and we started realizing that, hey, all these other things, they fit somewhere along this autism spectrum.
Yeah.
And so the definition was greatly expanded.
Yeah.
And so the numbers went way, way up.
Is that just like ADD then?
Yeah, I mean, everything that can possibly fit on the spectrum was included in the spectrum. And so...
Is ADD on the spectrum?
that would be a question for my wife.
Yeah.
She's the psychology, which is handy. I use her all the time for the show. So I'm not sure about that, but that's what the reason why we have an increase in autism incidents. We don't really have an increase in incidents. We have an increase in reporting.
So I find that pretty fascinating, because then all of a sudden you have the increase in reporting, which then causes fingers to be pointed at things that might not be doing anything to it, like vaccines. And you're like, okay, that hysteria from just reporting it. It's funny, the domino effect, there's always a reaction to everything that we end up doing. And in this case, it can end up getting a lot of kids really hurt. So what do you think to like moms and parents out there who are in Central Oregon or anywhere in the U.S. Who are adamant about not vaccinating their kids?
You see, they're seeking out data that confirms their preferred version of events. And if we look at moral foundation theory as the ultimate cause of this, and I tend to fall in the camp that says that it is, they're going to embrace any sort of a philosophy or any sort of an idea that confirms that belief and that makes them correct. If you want to, can I request a chart here?
Yeah.
Google for a chart that compares autism rates and organic food sales.
Oh.
And so this is a great example of how data can be used to show just about anything you want it to show.
Showing that
So
organic food
what these
ties to autism.
What these people will often do in their effort to provide information that supports the claim that vaccines cause
you go.
autism.
Wow.
Look at that. You can find all sorts of things with similar causes. The organic food industry happened to appear and was one of the most wildly successful marketing campaigns in history. That was just happening as the autism spectrum was being broadened and reporting started happening better. And so we've got this great correlation. Now, you and we all know that there is absolutely nothing to do with these two things. And
But somebody's going to believe that.
Well, this was put together as a joke. I mean, this isn't.
I still
this
think
isn't
somebody's gonna
intended.
believe it.
Well, they may.
All you gotta do is take it out of context of you saying it's a joke, and then take a micro clip of this, and somebody can run with it and like, look at this, and then all of a sudden you get some people not eating organic food because they're like, I don't want my kid to be autistic.
Yeah. And this chart was put together as a direct response to the identical chart showing autism compared to vaccine, the MMR vaccine. I believe
There's one that does that.
Yeah, which is no more connected to reality than this is.
But my point is that we could easily make this become a thing, like that people really believe in and fight over. It's just an idea. It doesn't matter how silly the idea is. The flat Earth is just an idea, but you get enough people behind. You get me going around like talking like, no, look at this, and I get really convincing and everything like that. Somebody eventually will buy in. Somebody else will eventually buy in. And before you know it, we have a bit of a movement going against organic food because it's causing autism. Save our kids, Brian. We have to save our kids. I actually joked about this in college. So when we founded a fraternity, and in it, we were just getting this movement going, and it was from nothing. And all of a sudden, we have these kids come in and join in, and it was good. It was just a normal fraternity and everything. But I had this idea. I was just like, I wonder how hard it would be to start a religion, a tax-free business. And I was talking with my guys, we were joking about just college kids and stuff like that. I was like, yeah, we'll make it polytheistic because that's been out for a while. I think the idea of one God is just a bit ridiculous anyway. There has to be multiple gods. We have to have a God for the sun and water and rivers and mountains. I mean, to one guy or woman or whatever to look over all that, that's just completely unreasonable. We should have multiple gods. And so I started just for fun, really just for fun, just started shouting about this during like chapter meetings, just getting laughs from my friends. And I had like 2 guys after doing this 3 times. I won't name who, but they ended up coming up and being like, so how do we, is it, you were saying 10%. So of our 10% of what we get at school of our income here. And I was just like, whoa, what's going on? They're like, yeah, it is multiple gods, and you want 10% of our income. Sounds good. And I was just like, no. But as ridiculous.
Why did you back off on that?
I don't know. Hindsight could have been a great business model. It's not tax free.
If it makes them feel good and gives them comfort, let them contribute the 10%.
I guess so. But that's,
I am joking, of course.
Oh, I know. But that's why I'm saying this ridiculous chart. That's how easy it is to get a movement going. You just need somebody behind it, somebody who you would be a good orator for anything. You have a great voice, Brian. And if you were to stand behind a podium and start talking about this chart, you're going to get people to believe. Brian and I, we met at a panel. We're at a podcast panel. Brian's podcast, way more successful than mine. Skeptoid, as I said, an Introid.
But no fancy screen on the wall.
No fancy screen on the wall. It's all right. Anyway, so we were talking, and all these people were listening and clinging on to most of the words that you and I were saying. If we put that chart on the wall and started talking that this is the real deal, there's going to be people that would have left that conference because of the position we were in a position of power at that time, that would have walked away saying, yeah, organic foods is tied to autism.
You bring up a scary point. I've done a lot of public speaking. I'm sure you have as well. And one thing that you learn early on is, wow, just by virtue of me standing up here at the microphone in front of a room, everyone thinks I know what I'm talking about. And anything I say, someone in this room is going to accept it as truth. That's a powerful platform. And there's a lot of truth to it.
It is.
I mean, a number of times I've become flustered or lost my train of thought, and I would just BS for a minute.
Yeah.
And people are still going, oh, wow.
It's true.
So, public communication is a very, very powerful thing. And just because it's being communicated doesn't mean that there's any truth to it at all.
No. And that's the hard thing because now, anybody can be on a platform and say basically whatever they want. Like, this is, I don't know what really the difference is between betting somebody that's going to be on the Central Oregon Daily News and me. But I'm not, saying that you guys got to start believing that organic foods is tied to autism. But my point is it's not that hard to all of a sudden have a platform behind. So now you have all these people talking about what they think you should be doing. And as a human, it's very difficult. It's become so difficult for me personally that I've kind of given up on what to follow politically, that is. Because there's so much fake news real. Like I don't know what the heck is real or not anymore, because all this news is maybe real, most of it's fake, and now they have more and more AI bots that are being created as creating technology literally exists right now as we speak for the Vladimir Putin's phone to ring and what he thinks would be Trump on the other side, and Trump to say, we're nuking you right now. That exists to sound exactly like him, and it's not Trump. So it's just like, how do you end up believing, what do you do? How do you end up believing what to do, what to report on? Because you're going through, you have the science show where you go in and you look skeptical at stuff, and it's very intellectual, but you have to run into a bunch of bullshit. So how do you know what is true and what is not?
So that's a fantastic question. It's something that I think about a lot. And I don't have a great answer for it. I don't have a convincing answer for it. My answer is I've been doing this a long time. I've been doing this for 13 years, and I've gotten pretty damn good at researching. That doesn't sound very convincing. It sounds like I'm being kind of arrogant. So, well, I just know. The sad thing about it is that's kind of what the answer has to be. Yeah. Because there is no single oracle of what's true and what's not. For what I'm doing, for example, what was I working on today? I was working on, there is a theory that the Dutch master artist Johannes Vermeer used an optical mechanical aid to do his painting called a camera obscura. Now, it's totally false. There's no truth behind it at all, but it's been very popularly reported for almost 100 years that he used a camera obscura, that there's no way any human could have been so good at drawing this scene and painting the colors so perfectly. So I'm now having to go through literally a century of articles published in art history journals and old books and read what people were saying and when, and finding what the currents were for what group of people thought this, what group of people were arguing against it, who they were, what their credentials were, who they had co-authored with in the past. You have to follow so many threads to really kind of get the feel of, okay, so I've identified this guy, and this guy. I can be pretty sure they're all full of shit because they've been promoting this no matter what happens. And I've got this guy, and this guy, and they've been changing their mind, and they've been honest, and they've been talking about both sides. And you just kind of have to develop a feel for it. And the reason I say it's such a bad answer is because it's an unfortunate answer. Because I can't expect the average person who hears something random like a 5G cell phone is going to kill you to be able to come to the truth of that, whether that's true or not. I can probably, at least probably better than him, because I've got so much experience doing it. But there is no way that, there's no anointment of oil on the head that says, your research is right and your research is wrong. There's no such thing as that. It just kind of has to come down to experience.
But there is like peer review, and there is like levels of authenticity and legitimacy. So I guess, and I know like, for example, when we were meeting yesterday, we were talking about talked about a bunch of stuff, but what was oh, yeah, when we were going down the cell phone train. Let's go down that train.
Yeah.
The rats.
The Seralini study you're talking about.
Yeah. So so I looked into that a bit more, and that survey, which basically showed, I'll have you dive into it more, but it wasn't peer reviewed, and then it just leaked out to the public. I don't know why. And now all these people end up believing that 5G and cell phones are going to give you brain tumors.
Yeah.
When the interesting thing was from the case study, you had the rats that weren't exposed to radiation, and then the mice that were. And the mice that were, 3% of them got brain tumors, but 2% of those mice get brain tumors anyway. And then the mice in the other group that weren't exposed to radiation, they didn't get brain tumors, but they lived longer. So I was just like,
Right.
okay.
The interesting thing from that study, so it's called the Seralini study after the lead author on it. And these were people who were lifetime opponents of technology. Okay, these were not impartial researchers at all.
Okay.
And you wouldn't know that unless you went and researched their backgrounds, what they'd written on previously.
So what do you think makes one like a lifetime hater of technology?
Well, you look at the stuff that he's been writing since he was, an undergrad. And you look at the stuff that he's been publishing.
How old is the guy?
Well,
do you think?
You can find, regular college age. How old was Seralini when he published the study? I have no idea.
I'm trying to think. I'm just thinking of like what he wrote before that.
But let me correctly add, the Seralini study is not wrong because of who he is or what he'd said in the past. It's wrong because it's wrong. And we need to focus on the facts of the study, not on who the people were in it. That's a big red flag, though, and that's something that I can often use to my advantage when I'm doing research. I can see, oh, these people have dedicated their entire careers to saying that cell phones are going to kill us all. So their research is probably biased in that direction. Now, that's a fair comment, but it's not proof by itself. You still have to find what's wrong with the actual study. Now, you did mention that the rats he chose for this study are specially genetically bred to all get tumors.
No, I didn't know that.
I mean, there are literally tens of thousands of strains of lab rats for all kinds of different purposes. And back in my computer science career, I did a major project for the Shriners Hospital that does a lot of research on rats. And I had to develop this actually, these were mice. I had to develop this entire database of lab rats. And the number of different strains of mice and rats, all bred for different purposes, is just mind-blowing. Anyway, so they used rats that they knew were going to get tumors no matter what happened to them. And so the effect of being put in this room with these extreme doses of very powerful radio waves, it was probably nothing. I mean, we know that radio waves don't interact with human or living tissue. And so there was probably no effect at all. But just by virtue of noise in the data, the only thing that came out of it that was statistically significant, which you mentioned, was that one of the groups of rats that were exposed ended up living longer. Now, that was just noise in the data. I mean, to anyone who analyzes this properly and can look at the study and determine whether it was methodologically flawed or not, or whether it was valid, they can tell these kind of things. I'm like a beginning journeyman level at being able to read a study and tell if it was methodologically flawed. I mean, you have to have expertise in statistics and all kinds of things. But that's what's so funny about it.
Yeah, a couple of things on that. Well, one big thing. That is organic versus autism, or organic and autism link. It's just a different example. Like, it's a ridiculous study that proves that cell phones are bad, and it actually went as far as making me think that until I ended up talking to you, where I have like a special case for my phone and stuff like that, because I was like, well, I don't want to have a brain.
Right.
I didn't know it stemmed from that, but the marketing from it, just a little research I did, I was just like, you know what, I'm going to take I didn't go too far down the rabbit hole at all, actually. I was just like, if it is possible, I'm just going to get a case to make it less. So some company definitely is coming off on a good advantage on this, because it's a more expensive phone case.
There's a great little
Pong.
There's a great
Pong, yeah.
Let me share with you a trick of the trade here. If you have a question about something and you want to know whether it's true, for example, the Seralini rat study, or 5G cell phones and brain tumors, do a Google search for that term, but then add the word skeptic. And I guarantee you will get...
And then you pop up.
You're not me, no. Well, maybe me, but more likely you're going to get the community of science bloggers science bloggers are really the place to go because there's no editorial process in the way. You don't have things like the file drawer effect and all these other things that keep things out of publications. So the science bloggers are the first to react whenever there's a BS study published. And you always get someone with the exact right expertise who is actually the person writing the blog. So you have a question, Google it and add the word skeptic.
Is 5G going to give us all cancer and make birds die and make trees instantly self-combust? Skeptic.
We're talking about designing a study specifically intending to achieve a desired result. Yesterday when we were having lunch, we talked about the Mount St. Helens study, where the young Earth creationists did a radiometric study of some rock from Mount St. Helens, the age of which is known because Mount St. Helens blew up. We were all there.
Yep.
And he was showing that, the radiometric data says that this rock is, 100,000 years old. Therefore, all radiometric data should be thrown out. Therefore, the Earth is 6,000 years old. So, he was someone who was very motivated to promote his particular agenda.
Sure.
And so he designed a study beginning to end specifically to achieve invalid results that he knew were invalid.
So that's a fascinating thing of just like, what is your motivation? Why are you doing the study? Then what's the provenance of studies that you can trust? Like, because, if you have people that are testing cigarette studies, like, well, who paid for them?
Yeah.
So what is a true unbiased study? Where are those created?
So you bring up another very troublesome point. Let's say there's a test on Vioxx. Remember, Vioxx was a drug. It was taken off the market. Now it's finally coming back on the market.
I'm trying to remember what that
20
was.
years later. It was a pain reliever. Like if you got joint pain for athletes, and it was giving people heart valve damage, and so it was taken off the market.
Okay.
So you might demand to say, who funded the studies that found Vioxx was safe? So my answer to that is, well, who do you think should fund the studies?
Yeah.
Do you want to? Should the taxpayers fund those studies? No. The company should have to fund it themselves.
What?
Well, but they did, and that's the reason you don't like the results is because they self-funded it. But that's how the industry does work.
Yeah, it does.
If you want to get something approved, you have to present the FDA with all of your studies and everything. Who's going to pay for those? No one else is volunteering to.
No.
You have to pay for them yourself.
Something really troublesome in that industry that came to light to me was the fact that pharmaceutical companies, they build into the P&L when they launch a new drug a large amount of, it's almost like a marketing expense on the P&L, but it's for class action lawsuits because they know a certain amount of people are going to die or get severely hurt or a disease or whatever the case is. They know it's going to happen.
People are going to sue no matter what.
Well, yeah, but they know that the side effect. I mean, when you listen to a pharmaceutical drug on the NBC,
this is very good wine, by the way.
Oh yeah. Compton Wines is, but
Let's give that a try.
yeah. Oh, do you need some? Oh yeah. Sorry, Mitch.
Yeah, thirsty.
Where was I going with that? So
Actually, pass it back. I need to.
Just all the side effects on those drug commercials. Some of them go as far as, and in some cases, death.
Yeah.
That's where in that P&L, that's where you write that in. Well, in some cases, death, because greed does get in the way when it comes to big pharma. Now, they do come up with some good things, but my goal personally is like, if I don't need to, like I had high blood pressure at an age where I was like 28, 29, and I is either keep on eating meat, and my dad passed away from a heart attack and having high blood pressure, and he was on high blood pressure medication. My dad and my brothers are both on it, and I was just like, I really don't want to do that, and I'm going to go plant-based and see how that helps. And I'm vegetarian now. I'm not fully vegan anymore due to other health reasons, but anyway, it caused it to go down significantly. So actually to be 120 over like 75, like very, very healthy.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, but I don't need to be on a drug because those blood pressure medications is like, you're on this now for the rest of your life, and it does help, but rather not have to go down that road for companies that have in their P&L, this many people might die from this. But I would like to hear your stance on it. I mean, I'm obviously not a big fan of big pharma. I'm seeing the look in your face that you have.
You know what? I mean, there is a lot to criticize about the pharmaceutical industry, but what's really hard is to say, okay, well, what could work better? Because, I mean, we do have to have all these drugs. What's a better system? And I'm not sure that anyone really knows the answer to that.
Yeah.
There's probably no perfect system, and any way that things could be changed would satisfy some people and upset other people. I tend to have sort of a positive outlook on it and say, I think it's about as good a system as we can practically expect within all the practical considerations. You know, one of the things that's difficult is,
I think it's more practical in other developed nations with like universal health care.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
There's no bigger proponent than universal health care than me.
Yeah.
Here's one of the difficulties, though, is that R&D is spread all around the world, research and development for drugs. Universities are doing research all around the world. The D half of it, the development, is done almost entirely, grossly disproportionately inside the United States. Mm-hmm. And so the costs are always going to be higher inside the United States unless and until that changes dramatically. And that's just kind of something that's built into the system. And so it's not a fault of politics or of policies or of companies being immoral. It's simply a fact of life that the costs are a hell of a lot higher in the U.S. than they are in other countries. And it's because U.S. pharmaceutical companies have to pay for all that development, including all the trials and just, literally working on drugs for 20 and 30 years with no return, with massive investments, hoping that it'll get approved and make them money in the future. And that's something that other countries do to a much, much smaller degree. You've got a couple of pharmaceutical companies in Japan that offload their development to the U.S.
Yeah. Well, and then you have
It's a situation that sucks. I'm not defending it. I'm saying that there's a lot of unfortunate truths to
and
it.
that's something I think that we could talk on a whole nother show on diving in on what's the right way to manage that and how government should intervene and whatnot. But one thing I did just think on, bringing it back to the vaccinations, on just showing a bit of empathy towards that other side, because I just got hit with a little bit of it. It's just like, I could see where they could stand from, I don't agree with it because I had kids getting the measles. We saw the chart, screw that. But I'm just saying I'm giving a little bit of empathy because it's a cultural norm now to hate big pharma in the U.S. And that relates to vaccines. And they're like, well, I want my kid to be all natural, organic, blah, 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 blah. Well, turns out if you eat organic food, then they're going to get autism. But, anyway, but I can kind of see that, you have everybody being like, screw big pharma. It's not for me. It's not for my kid. Vaccines come from them.
Yeah.
So I can understand that. But shifting back also to some other things that are happening here in Bend, you were telling me, was that here in town where you saw the protests by the school?
Oh, yeah, it's a school right by my house. I'm sorry, I don't know the name of it. It's an elementary school right down by my house near Brookswood Plaza. They're putting up a cell phone tower. I don't know if it's 5G. I doubt
Probably.
it. I have no idea. Maybe it is, maybe I don't.
Yeah.
But while they were doing the initial construction, there was protesters there every day, and they would post a whole bunch of signs, and then the next morning the signs would be gone. And then the next day the protesters would be back, and they would post more signs and tape them everywhere, and then they're all gone again the next morning. Now, I haven't seen any. Is this?
Yeah.
We have
There they are.
So, and basically the signs were saying, save our children from the cell phone tower. The cell phone tower is going to give all of our children cancer.
What does that say? Educate, not, well, I guess you can't see.
Probably, I'm guessing it says educate, not radiate.
Yeah.
That's a pretty common.
That's a good Channing saying.
Children are worth more than
Isn't it?
Verizon's bottom line.
Yeah, that's until
Yeah.
you get those fucking blazing fast speeds, know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so again, I look at what motivates these people. Are these people anti-technology? No. They're pro-children, and that's what's motivating them. And everyone's pro-children, and we should all agree with that.
I like kids.
They bring some bad information to the table. They've been given bad information.
Keep us safe.
They've been given bad information, which they have warmly embraced, probably because it scratches them.
So why is it bad? Why is it bad information? Why? Well, let's see. No, I'll leave it that open-ended. Why is it bad information?
Well, it's scientifically false that
Why?
that radio signals hurt people. I mean, we have
That's not what the internet tells
we
me.
have centuries of data that radio does not hurt people, and cell phone signals
Wait,
are
Clive,
radio like any
okay.
other radio.
Okay, so
And
I think that's educational for a lot of people. So cell phone signals are radio.
yeah,
Like
What else would they
the
be?
radio I used to listen to back in the 90s?
like exactly like the radio, and exactly
Okay.
like we get from the sun all day long.
Okay.
The light from these studio lights right here is the exact same kind of radiation. It's all on the
Oh.
electromagnetic spectrum.
Turn
Now,
off
this-
the lights.
This light isn't hurting us, and the light is the highest frequency that the human body can possibly. Let me rephrase that. Light is where at the high end of the light spectrum is where we cross from non-ionizing radiation into ionizing radiation, and that's really what the whole thing is about, and that's why the whole cell phone or other radio kills us. Why that argument dies in its tracks. It's because those are all well down into the non-ionizing part of the spectrum. And what ionizing means is it's at an energy level that it can strip electrons and make chemical changes to the things that it hits. If a radio signal hits my body,
Your atoms are not going to change.
it doesn't. There is insufficient energy in that frequency of signal.
Your DNA won't be hit. So
And so that's why when we talk
your
about
skin
visible
is
light,
protecting you from. No, that goes through, doesn't it?
you're talking about like cosmic rays and radiation and different types of radiation.
I'm pretty sure
We're not talking
radio.
about electromagnetic radiation.
Okay.
Electromagnetic radiation will penetrate your skin. The lowest frequency goes right through you, like what they use to communicate from submarines and stuff. That'll go right through you, but it doesn't interact with tissue because it's non-ionizing.
Got it.
Light does not penetrate very far into our skin, but if you could be inside a little tiny submarine and go 1 millimeter into your skin, you'd probably see some light, and maybe 5 millimeters, maybe it'd be dark by then. So light can penetrate somewhat. Now, radio waves are all lower on the spectrum than that, so they penetrate a little bit further, but the higher the frequency gets, the less it penetrates. So where you get to the very maximum end of the spectrum in the visible light is purple, and it becomes ultraviolet, and then it becomes sunburn. And that's where we're starting to damage tissue. Sunburn that's the beginning of ionizing radiation.
Got it.
And anything above that, you're talking gamma rays and stuff from outer space. That's going to start to do real gnarly damage.
Okay. So where does we have the radiation, so it's the R word, right? So these cell phones emit radiation, and that's bad.
Yeah.
Where do you think the studies come that pepper the internet of like brain tumors that are associated in people and things of that nature?
It comes from basically the same place that we're talking about, moral foundations theory. There's this whole thing of, let me back up. What's the best way to frame this? There's a cultural movement that started, it became popular in the 60s and the 70s. It started to grow, called the Western esotericism movement. And this coincided with the rise of Chinese wisdom and everything in the U.S. There began to be an embrace of the natural and a rejection of the man-made, of the artificial. So the esotericism movement was largely about that. And, excuse me, if you look at the 70s, I mean, that's flower children and everything. That's where that was what it was all about. And that very much persists today. It persists mainly in cultures that are economically successful and people are comfortable and have all their needs taken care of, like us. Well, you need something to worry about. What should we worry about?
That's fascinating.
So the Western esotericism movement is really the ultimate foundation of all of these things that look for.
Yeah, we don't have any lions trying to kill us or mountain lions or anything like that.
We don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, but Bigfoot.
So Bigfoot,
yeah, we got to worry about him.
I've been concerned about Bigfoot my whole life.
Okay, so that esotericism is causing us to basically make something for us to fear because we're lacking that.
I think I wouldn't put it in those specific terms. I would say it puts people in a place where they're willing to accept something invented by those evil, corrupt humans as harmful. because it's not natural. It's not part of the glorious natural world.
Oh, the glorious natural world. You know, when those people
box
start going
jellyfish, neurotoxin, botulism, bubonic plague, rattlesnake venom, hemlock.
Yeah, and when people start going to natural things so much, but they drive around in cars and like to use electricity, I'm like, that's interesting. That car's natural. It came from the habitat. I used to roam the plains of America. It was great. So the 5G technology, a fascinating thing I was seeing on cell phones and this whole phobia that developed that I was a part of too until you educated me was not only do radio waves not really do anything to you at all, they don't, but it's only in really rare cases that scientists have studied these people in depth, of these people with high sensitivity can actually hear radio waves.
Oh yeah. That's fascinating.
It is, and they can't. And by hearing radio waves, they can't hear. They can't hear like the song that's on radio. That's impossible. But they can hear like the tones, and so they would put the person's head like really close to a radio transmitter and be measuring it, and they would register these clicks and these clacks, clicks, and everything.
Yeah.
And what they came to find was that it was their tissue going to the sound of it, and what the tissue was doing, it was the noise it was making from heating up. And at first you'd be like, oh well, that's pretty freaky. Well, then like stay away from them, showers and baths, I guess, because your tissue's going to heat up in that as well.
Yeah, so the common example of that most people have been exposed to is an MRI machine. Have you had an MRI?
Yeah, they're loud as hell.
Yeah, it's all this crashing and banging. And you wonder, what the heck is actually making that noise? Because there are moving parts, but they're not making the noise. It's actually the structure of the machine itself expanding and contracting very, very rapidly, very minute amounts, generating sound. Bang, 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 crash. And that's just these magnetic fields coming and going and making the structure expand and contract, with thermal. And that's exactly, as you say, that's exactly what's happening with some people who have been found. It gets wrongly reported as saying they can hear radio. Well, they're not hearing the radio waves. The radio waves are making the same kind of thermal expansion happen in their tissues, like perhaps their skull or something. It's incredibly minute amounts, but making it move just enough that they can hear that. You know, just like if you tap your collarbone, you'll hear a thump.
Right.
But it's your tissue moving. You didn't hear the radio. You heard the effect of the radio, because that's the one thing that all radio waves can do. Because radio waves are energy, is they can heat things up.
So the energy thing, it heats things up. That's no big deal. The light heats us up too, and we're fine unless you get like sunburn like you were talking about. And now going to 5G as well. So we had pulled up on there earlier a bunch of kids in Bend, holding signs, keep us safe and stuff like that. Have you heard much about Russian influence when it comes to 5G?
Oh, as in terms of like fake book articles. That
it's like RT. If you can, Mitch,
Russia Today, RT America.
Yeah,
they've got a whole
America.
bunch of channels.
Yeah, but they have millions upon millions of views. If you look at RT Today 5G, and they're the ones pushing. Like, why is that? It's like now.
I think I reported specifically on that. In my 5G
it's because
article.
they're falling. But there's this whole race to get to 5G first between the superpowers of the world: China, Russia, America. Russia is not doing well in this race.
No, you're right.
And so they want public opinion on its competitors to slow it down.
Exactly.
So you guys protesting the antenna. That's exactly what Russia wants you to do.
Exactly.
Did that change something? Because Russia also wanted you to vote in Trump, and I mean, come on, like I think that might change people's perceptions a little bit if they hear how they got this misinformation. It came from Russia.
I agree. I would hope so. I mean, that's another part of what I really enjoy about my job is it's not always so much what does the science say versus what does the science not support. It's how and why these trends and belief appear. And when you look at the whole cultural context of Russia, their 5G system does suck, and they are 5 or 10 years behind most Western countries. And they do actually have an interest in slowing everyone else down. That is, to me, that's really cool. I hear that and I go, oh, neat.
Yeah.
I just learned a really cool fact.
It is cool. It's a
And
fun
so
Cold War shit.
It makes sense for them to promote. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It makes sense for them to promote these stories on Facebook or wherever.
It's straight up propaganda.
Yeah, it is.
And it's amazing how it's working.
And they have gotten good enough at this. Have you heard any of these? There have been a couple of NPR podcasts where they interviewed people who worked at these Russian firms.
I have
and
not.
later said, "The heck with this! I'm
I'd
moving
be
to the United
fascinated to
States."
learn.
Yeah.
Oh, heck with them. Okay.
Yeah.
What made them bounce?
There have been people who worked there and decided this is just not morally what I want to do with my life. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
There I go, losing my train of thought again. So
Russian.
by virtue of continuing to seem like an expert, I'll just bullshit about anything. And, no, but
At least you're honest. So the Russian, so basically they're working like this propaganda machine. They make this media and they put it out on social media articles, and there's YouTube of this 5G stuff. This is the same people that got Trump. Like, well, you can go back and forth on what caused it and everything, but it is accused of him coming in office, which apparently is like the worst thing ever. Blah blah blah. But that's a whole nother conversation.
yeah. Well, the worldwide rise in populism. I mean, Trump is, a puzzle piece in a much larger puzzle. This worldwide rise in populism, a rejection of expertise. That's something that kind of has me scared. Because all around the world, it's not a U.S. thing. Trump, as has been said many times, Trump is a symptom. He's not the cause of something that was happening independent of him, which is this worldwide rise in populism.
What do you mean by populism?
Populism is the ideology. It's really that's Trump's political party. It's a rejection of those experts up in their ivory towers. Let's power to the people, power to those of us that we didn't necessarily go to college, but we don't necessarily have PhDs in this or that, but power to us. And I think we all agree with that there's validity to that.
Yeah.
Everyone should have power. But what's not valid about that is the experts aren't actually experts. We know better with our mommy skills that we were talking about before. We know better than experts.
Yeah.
Because I'm a mom, I know what's best for my baby more than this elitist doctor with his fancy degree printed up on the wall. That's basically populism.
So, what's your opinion then on the Electoral College?
So, there is a lot to say on the Electoral College and gerrymandering, and which are closely related.
Yeah, there.
But what I found, I did an episode on the science of elections.
You should wait really quick before the science of elections.
Please.
Let's go into what gerrymandering is.
Oh, yeah, gerrymandering. In fact, pull up a diagram. Can
The
you do
diagram of gerrymandering is amazing.
that? Yeah. let's see a graphic of gerrymandering.
Was it?
Oh, you've been putting up all these great articles.
Oh yeah.
That's nice work.
Yeah. When would the gerrymandering, was that like is that early 20th century or 18th, 19th century?
I expect it goes back a lot longer than any of us would dare to think. So
Okay.
yeah, if we look at gerrymandering here, if we look at number 3 on the right, we can see that the districts have been drawn so that red wins, even though there are more blue voters than red voters.
Yeah.
That's the cleverness of gerrymandering. You stuff as many, like 49% of the red people or of the blue people as you can into a few districts. Wait, am I getting this? I'm probably getting this backwards.
No, you're getting it right.
Okay, so if we look at most of the blue districts, like those 2 blue districts on the right are 99% blue and 1% red. And then the red districts on the left are just about half and half. So we're trying to take care of most of the minority. We're trying to spread the minority over as many of the districts as possible. I may not be explaining that right, but I think the idea comes across.
Yeah, basically.
Correct me if I'm saying
Well, no,
it
you're
wrong.
saying it right. So this is when you're saying it's close to electoral college, because this is basically where you have representation of these people in like the heartland of Nebraska and Iowa and so on and so forth, holding some weight. California has a bunch of people, but it's balanced by the House of Representatives and the Senate, because that's where your electoral college things come from. But this happens on a scale of counties. And like all the weird, ridiculous county not draws, borders that you see, that's all from gerrymandering. Yeah. That's all from getting votes to go in a certain way and have certain things. So it happens even on a local level.
Yeah, gerrymandering is a terrible thing.
It really is. Okay, so going into that science of elections.
So what I found in this, and this was before, I did this episode before the Trump era, so this was not... it was not tainted by the current passions that are dividing everyone. What I concluded was that the electoral college and gerrymandering and everything, while those are problems and those are things that can be discussed separately, the real problem is the basic way the U.S. electoral system works. And let's just focus on how we elect the president for a moment. The way that we elect the president is we have like 8 different candidates, right? Mm-hmm. We got the 2 major parties and then a bunch of parties nobody's ever heard of that get no votes. Mm-hmm. Voters select one and only one. Now this violates a mathematical principle, an economic principle called Arrow's impossibility theorem. There was an economist named his last name was Arrow, and he came up with this impossibility theorem that says no fair electoral system exists when there are more than 2 candidates and voters are forced to rank them. And ranking means putting them in order, or it means selecting just one because you're effectively ranking that person first. So, dude, you are so on it with the graphics. I appreciate that a lot. What that means is, do you remember when Ross Perot ran?
Yeah.
He split, did he split the Democratic vote or the... No, Ralph Nader split the Democratic vote. Did. And Ross Perot split the Republican.
He went after Bob Dole. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you throw in one of these crazy third-party candidates who is going to get a lot of votes, he's going to split the votes of one party or the other, depending on whichever one he's closest to. And then the other candidate wins. Mm-hmm. So let's say, for sake of argument, that candidates A and B are running, and candidate C is very close to candidate B. Let's say most people are in this party, but since the votes are split 50-50 between these 2 candidates, the other less favored party is going to be the winner. Mm-hmm. So that's why there was a French mathematician named Condorcet, and what's named after him is the Condorcet candidate, which was the candidate most favored by the most number of voters who would beat all the other candidates in head-to-head elections. The ideal outcome for every election is to have the Condorcet candidate win. Right? You following it so far?
Wait, the Condorcet is which candidate?
The most favored one. The guy who legitimately should win the election.
The guy who should win. Okay, I'm following you.
The guy that most people want him over any of the other people.
Got it.
Now, in the U.S. system, where you can only vote for one person, period, the Condorcet candidate does not always win. In fact, often doesn't win. Whenever there is a third-party candidate who splits one or the other of the major parties' votes.
Which is often.
Yeah. So it's really easy to fix this. There's 2 simple ways to fix it. The third way to fix it, this is crazy, which is you select at random one voter from the entire country. And you say, his vote, whoever he voted for, that's the new president.
Let's do that one. And we can all blame that guy. That guy or woman, that person is to blame. Damn it, Sally.
Listen to why this makes sense. Let's say that there are 2 great candidates who all have 48% of the vote and a bunch of crazy candidates who each have 1% of the vote. Yeah. When you're going to select one guy at random, lottery style, there is a 1% chance that you're going to draw one of those crazy candidates, and there's a 48% chance that you're going to draw one of the mainstream candidates.
I think I would go for it. Like, if that happened to me, I'd be like, let's mix things up. Let's go for that 1%, man.
So
is that how Trump got into power?
Here is the way we can fix that. Let voters vote for as many candidates as they want.
But okay, there has to be a ranking system.
Let's go back to my. Let's stick with this for a moment.
Okay.
Let's go back to my example of there's Party A, and there's the other party that has candidates B and C.
Oh.
Most people like these.
That makes sense.
Now, if everyone could vote for both of these guys, and some people are probably only going to vote for one of them, but a lot of people are going to vote for both of them because they'd rather have either of them than this guy.
Yeah.
Then one of those guys is going to win the election. In simulations and in countries that do this, we have found that this voting system elects the Condorcet candidate 100% of the time.
What's a
That's called approval voting, by the way.
Okay, that's fascinating. What's a country that does this?
I couldn't tell you.
Approval
a quick
voting?
check of Wikipedia will tell you that, I'm sure. What
Approval
countries
voting,
use
Mitch.
Approval
Who
voting.
does approval voting? That's yeah. So at first I thought you'd have to rank it, but then as you were talking, it just made complete sense. Yeah. If I, who was the third? Was there a third one when it was Trump versus Hillary? Was there somebody that was making some noise?
there are, but nobody had a significant.
Yeah. So
There was an independent candidate about 20 years ago whose name I don't even remember. And then there was Ross Perot, and then there
Ralph
was Ralph
Nader.
Nader. And those are really the only significant ones. But still, that's 3 elections out of the last 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
It is. That's quite fascinating because that could have, I don't know, perhaps made Bob Dole our president if he did it that way.
It could have.
If I'm thinking right, if that's when the time.
The other way to do it is called range voting. And range voting is, you know how in the Olympics when the guy dives and the judges all hold up a number,
Oh, we do this in Oregon.
Do we really?
I don't know. Apparently. Wait, approval voting has been used.
Privately administered.
Oh.
I don't remember that on any of my ballots.
Approval voting has been used in privately administered
Nomination.
contest by the Independent Party of Oregon in 2011, 12, 14, 16.
Oregon is a fusion voting state. What the hell does that mean? Click on that. What's fusion voting? Electoral fusion
We're going to go down an
is an
endless rabbit
arrangement
hole
where
here.
2 or more. Is an arrangement where 2 or more political parties on a ballot list the same candidate.
Pooling the votes for
the
that
votes for that candidate, distinct from the process of electoral alliances, and that the political parties remain separately. Whoops.
Oh, it's for nomination. It's not for the final vote then.
Oh, okay. So that's happening in like the Oregon House,
I have no idea.
I guess.
Well, anyway, let
have
me
to look
continue.
at- yeah.
Let me continue with range voting. Range voting is like in the Olympics where you hold
Not
up
like
a score.
fusion voting.
Not like it's not fusion voting. It's not
It's
approval
not
voting.
fusion voting.
So if you could go to every candidate on the ballot and you could give them a score 1 to 10 or 1 to 3 or 1 to 5, whatever it is, but you could give every candidate a score. It's like, well, yeah, I kind of like this guy, but I'd rather this guy win, so I'm going to give him a 5. I'm going to give the guy kind of like a 4, and stuff like this.
That was the first thing I was going to.
So also this system also elects the Condorcet candidate 100% of the time, both in simulations and in the real world where it actually happens. The interesting thing about it is it produces something that they call the nursery effect, where if you've got a random candidate, just a totally random person who nobody knows anything about and nobody even knows him, people tend to give them an average vote. They'll give, I don't know who that guy is, so I'll give him a 5 on a scale of 1 to 10. And so it ends up conferring
being nice.
a much greater vote than was deserved by this candidate, than may be deserved by this candidate. We don't really know because we don't know him. But they call that the nursery effect. Regardless, it's the Condorcet candidate that wins.
So do you think that the Condorcet candidate is more of a philosophical question? Should always win?
Yeah. I mean, that's the idea of an election, is to get the person that most people want, to satisfy the most number of voters.
Yeah.
That's what the Condorcet candidate, that's how it's defined.
Oh, no, I get it. I'm just asking if that is always right. I mean, that's just going into the pros and cons of democracy, mob rule in a way. Is like, is that the right decision, though? Like to your point a little earlier, populist
That's
ideology.
I don't get into that part of it.
Well, no,
I leave that to the-
but going down to like if a bunch of people are just like, no, this is the person we want to have, but the other person running is a plutonic king, philosopher king, just somebody that we truly need, but he's running or she's running against Trump. You see what I'm saying?
Well,
like, does that make it right?
Who decides that candidate is someone that we truly need?
Well, that would just come from like that's just from conversations that we would be having over some drinks where like this person is intellectually far superior in every way and has a really good vision, but we have the populace voting, this other way. So, I mean, there's arguments to say that that's why the Electoral College has some benefit to it to help keep the main population from always picking the whole time.
The reason I said Electoral College doesn't really matter, that it's the voting system that really matters, is those are two different questions. The Electoral College is about states' rights, right? Each state has its state voice as a whole, as a body. And the question of should we have states' rights, should states vote as, like as if they are individual delegates or not, that's a question that's outside of my purview. That's not for me to decide. My interest is in how we get to whatever it is that we want to do, whatever it is that we want to achieve. My interest is in finding, okay, what is science, what is data support is the best way to achieve that.
So then taking a pivot onto the science and data and going back towards like a fun Oregon issue thing that we talk about is Bigfoot. I would like to talk about Bigfoot. I'd like to talk about...
I love Bigfoot.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about... Well, you said earlier that you believe in it, and I completely believe you. But I would like to, let's dive into... we had a fascinating lunch yesterday where we were talking about this, and one of the things was breaking down that Bigfoot clip. Could you pull that up, Mitch?
Ready to go?
The famous,
the Patterson-Gimlin film.
There you go. Yeah, let's talk about that. So how was that made, and how did that become so? How do pro Bigfoot people always point to that? Where is that provenance from?
So, I mean, you're asking a lot of questions. Oh no,
I am asking a lot of questions. Is it? There he goes.
You're raising a lot of points. I think there's a lot of. Now we know that this is. Because of investigative journalism that was done throughout the early 2000s, we know that this was a guy in a suit. We now know all the details about how and when and where and why this film was made. Mm-hmm. However, I think there's also a lot of bad criticism about it. People say it's obviously a guy in a suit, or people say you can see a zipper. I dismiss all of that. I think it looks friggin' fantastic.
Yeah.
And I think it looks and acts like a real animal. Have you ever run into a bear in the woods?
I have.
What does he do? Does he roar? Does he run away? Does he walk away unconcernedly like this, saying, "I don't give a flip about that friggin' human over there"?
Luckily for me, the bears did that.
That's exactly what my bears have done as well.
Yeah.
I think he acts just like a real animal, and I think he looks great. I mean, the coloring on his back looks to me just like a silverback gorilla. I think it looks wonderful.
Yeah, no, it looks. It looks real enough that everybody thinks it's real. That's Bigfoot.
I guff everyone who says the video looks bad. I think it looks great. However, we know that it's fake, and I think that was kind of always a foregone conclusion. But we do now know that it was fake.
You say we as too much of a collective because there's a lot of people that think that is real.
That's a great point. Thank you. That's a very valid correction. Mm-hmm. When I say I say we a lot, and I'm always speaking of
the scientific community.
I would be overstepping if I claimed to represent that. I would say the science communication.
I just did it by
community.
saying we all do that.
I, as a member of the National Association of Science Writers, I can claim to represent the science communicators of the world.
Got it.
So I will say that we now know that we now have a pretty complete story of how the film was made.
So since it looks good, we both conclude it looks like a bear not giving a shit about us in the woods. How was the film made? Where does that evidence lead us?
So, I mean, I did an episode about this. In my episode, let me be fair, and I'm just going to read you the citation where most of this came from. It came from the book written by Greg Long, The Making of Bigfoot, The Inside Story. It's a 2004 book based on this guy doing a tremendous amount of investigative journalism. And there was also one other author who did an equal amount who published shortly before he did. So by going around and talking to everyone who was involved in the story, who was still alive, because this is old, it's 1967. 352. The frame 352 is the famous one of the Bigfoot going like this.
Mm-hmm.
There it is. That's frame 3. Oh, and then in fact it says frame 352 right there. I just give that as evidence that everything I say is perfectly correct all the time. So this guy, Roger Patterson, who was the main guy who made the film, had a contract to make a nature film for a broadcasting company about Bigfoot.
So he had a nature film from a broadcasting company about Bigfoot.
Basically, he had money thrown at him to hire a bunch of guys.
Yeah. So this wasn't so Patterson just wasn't out in the woods.
It wasn't just out in the woods.
Yeah.
And obviously, whether you're hired to do it or not, if you go out in the woods to hopefully collect film of Bigfoot, and immediately Bigfoot presents himself and you get wonderful footage like this, that's either one heck of a coincidence or else something maybe is a little bit fishy somewhere.
Yeah, probably a little fishy somewhere. So where else does it get fishy on that?
We have the whole story of the guy in the suit. That's a guy named Bob Hieronymus, who is a young guy. I believe he's still alive.
Okay.
And if you see him walk, he still has exactly that same walk. It's hilarious.
Really?
Yeah.
So he just walks around like that all day?
He's not even acting. That's how he walks. That's how Bob Hieronymus walks.
Okay.
We know the guy that Roger Patterson bought the suit from. We have the receipt from where he bought the suit. Mm-hmm. We have the testimony of the costume guy that he called to ask, how do I modify the suit? I mean, we basically have almost all the pieces. There's a lot that we don't have. For example, once they had the film, this was 1967, so film had to be developed, right? Mm-hmm. So they had to get it back to the trailhead, back to their trucks and drive it into town. And then they had a relative who had an airplane who flew it to, I believe, Seattle to get it developed.
Okay.
And this was in Bluff Creek, California, so this is kind of far from Seattle.
Yeah, why don't you go to San Francisco?
Honestly, I don't know why that happened. It may have just been where this guy lived and where he had his business and everything.
Okay.
Greg Long's book, I'm sure, answers that question. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing to me about this is, and we talked about this yesterday, is I derive no joy from telling people that Bigfoot's fake.
Gotta be a little bit of joy.
No, it's not, because I think everyone would think it was awesome if Bigfoot was real. Yeah. Right? We all do. But,
until you meet him in the woods and he's angry.
To me, what's interesting in this is that what's the human story? Where's the human story behind this? And when we look at the character of Roger Patterson, the guy that made the film, he was the biggest jerk in history. He genuinely was. Nobody in the town where he lived liked him. He screwed people over in every business deal he was ever part of. He never paid his debts. He borrowed stuff and never returned it. He was in and out of jail on little petty crimes all the time. He was also an arrogant jerk. He was in really good physical condition. Yeah. And so what he liked to do was take his shirt off and walk on his hands up and down the street. So he's kind of a weirdo.
What?
Anyway.
Wait, take off his shirts and walk on his hands? So he'd be doing a handstand walking down the street?
He would.
All right, this guy made Bigfoot. Got it. All right.
The one saving grace in this guy's life was his wife. He loved his wife by all accounts, and he learned that he had a terminal cancer diagnosis. And at the time that this film was made, he knew that he was dying of cancer. He wasn't sure when. It might be a matter of months. It might be a matter of years.
So now you don't even care what people think.
He didn't care what anyone thought.
I don't think he cared even before he had cancer, from the sounds of it.
It doesn't sound like it at all. But
yeah,
he did
then
want to
he put the cherry on top.
He let me read you what happened after this film was released. It was a sensation, and to this day it rakes in revenue in licensing fees. Diatley, who was his father-in-law, I believe, backed Patterson and formed Bigfoot Enterprises on November 1st, just 10 days after the film was shot, and reported $200,000 in licensing fees in the first year. So by then that would have been 1968. And in $200,000 in 1968.
What's that with inflation today?
That's a question for Professor Google.
Yeah.
What is $200,000?
$1968 to 2019 dollars. I'm gonna guess that would be order of magnitude.
No, maybe in order of magnitude.
It could be. Do we have the answer forthcoming here on the screen? This is a question for Hey Siri.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't say that because now everyone's phone in the room goes bing.
Yeah, the spy.
So
The wiretaps?
it's worth pointing out that there was a whole bunch of lawsuits because this was so successful and there was so much money involved. Everyone started suing each other. $1.4 million, okay? No small change. That's the first year, just the first year.
Where'd you see one? Oh, it's right at the top. Yeah, there you go.
And so,
Wow.
and we're talking every year since then.
Almost an order of magnitude.
So Patty Patterson, which was his wife's his wife, she ended up with about half the rights. So if this is correct, she was entitled to about half of that money after some expenses, probably.
Not bad.
And so to me, the fascinating thing about this whole Bigfoot film is you've got this scumbag of a character who stole everything he ever touched and had no saving graces, successfully provided for his wife in one heck of a pretty darn good way in what was essentially his last-ditch effort at doing something useful with himself.
Well, at least
And he
was
did it
able.
by ripping people off.
Well, did he rip people off?
He
or
did.
Did he bring? Well, no. For this film. Is this film a
He had
rip-off?
been hired to shoot a film for a company that would own all rights to it.
Oh,
and
never
they
mind,
were
he
very
did.
much involved in the lawsuits. And basically, the lawsuits went on for years, but when the dust settled, his wife ended up owning about half of this film.
Okay.
So whatever happened with the other rights, that's a question for Greg Long's book.
So
It's a fascinating story, and to me, that's way more interesting and way more poignant and touching and important
yeah.
than simply telling Bigfoot people that their beloved monster is probably not real.
So then, how did if Bigfoot people then know that? Okay, let's just say everybody knows that that was a guy in a suit, and this is the backstory behind it. But then you still have Bigfoot believers.
Yeah, because of course the fact that one film was a hoax, that doesn't say anything about the existence of Bigfoot.
Right, because there's other films out there, I think. I don't know. I really don't go down this rabbit hole too often, but I'm always just like, I've
In
never
the days of iPhones and Photoshop, there's all kinds of
yeah.
and
yeah.
gorilla suits available for $49 on Amazon. There's lots of Bigfoot videos out there.
So does that get down to like the same sort of mentality, but just a different take on it? When we were talking about like vaccines and stuff like that, just people bonding together for, I mean, it wouldn't be liberty in this case.
That's a great question. I would need to go back to. There's two universities I know that do these surveys. There's Chapman University and there's the University of Miami, and they have these ongoing programs where every year they survey huge numbers of people about the things they believe in, and they come up with these charts and these trends and these correlations. So what you're asking is a fascinating question that I don't have my finger on the answer to, but it does exist. So we could look and we could find out what is it that the Bigfoot people, what are the other things that they embrace, and what are the values that they say are important to them? Because these are the kinds of things that these surveys track. And that would be a wonderful answer to get.
Last topic, just because I'm curious, because we're on Bigfoot right now. What's your opinion on aliens and that whole, because they're becoming incredibly popular.
So, okay. Oh gosh, there's a lot to say about this. I could go on for this for an hour. I can speak for.
Can we start with one thing, one question?
We can.
Do you believe in aliens? Yes or no?
What do you mean?
I mean, do you believe in aliens from outer space?
That aliens that there are other populated worlds out there?
Yes.
Or that aliens are visiting Earth? Because those are two very different questions.
They are different, but I just want the first one. They're out there.
Yes, unquestionably, and
Okay, good.
that
At least you're
represents
sane.
that represents the belief of virtually everyone who's in physics or in astronomy.
The numbers are too.
Yeah, it's
too
virtually a certainty that there is life on other planets.
Yeah.
It's not universal. There are people who construct very cogent arguments for why that's not the case.
Yeah, because God.
I am not persuaded by them. No, so I do believe that aliens exist.
Okay.
I know, because I'm not going down that road either. The question of are they actively visiting the Earth or have they ever visited the Earth? There is simply no evidence of that. And we know that the physics problems that would need to be overcome are essentially intractable according to everything that we've learned so far.
Okay, what about that guy that was on Joe Rogan and everybody going nuts
Bob
about
Lazar.
Bob, let's talk about Bob Lazar. I want to talk about Bob Lazar.
Bob Lazar is a guy who, how long ago did he first appear? It must have been
1980 something.
I was going to say 25 years. There he is.
Yeah, I think he came out.
This is a guy who basically came up with some goofy little hoax claim and it ended up taking over his entire life. And now he spends every day of his life trying to defend it. Interesting thing is what he does for a living is, you see, he's the owner of United Nuclear Scientific Equipment and Supplies.
Uh-huh.
You can buy all kinds of weird little things. It's a mail order business. It's like literally run by him out of a closet. But I've bought 2 products from him. I bought a canister of uranium ore because my daughter needed it for a physics project. And I bought a canister of trinitite, the melted dirt from the Nevada floor from the first Trinity U.S. nuclear test. Mm-hmm. He does sell those things. He has good prices, prompt shipping. So I fully endorse Bob Lazar as a source for weird little physics things that you want to buy.
Got it.
But his story is, of course, complete goofy nonsense. And
why do you say, of course, complete goofy nonsense? Why do you say, of course,
so he claims, his basic claim is that he worked at Area 51, reverse engineering.
Like Area 53 or something.
He then made up a place, S4. He then made up a new place because the people who actually work at Area 51 were released from their confidentiality agreements over a period of several years in the early 2000s. And they, as soon as they all laughed and said, no, of course, Bob Lazar never worked here. There's not that many people work here. We know them all. He's not among them. Big surprise. And also, by the way,
so you did
UFOs.
Say it was Area 51?
He used
started with that? Okay.
And then after that happened, after everyone said, no, he never worked here, he then made up a new place.
So it was actually S4. You weren't there.
S4. Oh, and
jokers.
It's down here at Paboose Lake. Can you bring up Google Earth? I'll show you exactly where he says he worked. In 2001, actually it was about a month before 9/11 happened, 2 friends and I, who were both pilots, we took a stupid little Cessna Skyhawk, so all 3 of us are pedaling as hard as we can. And we flew over the Sierras out to...
Over the Sierras, I've done that in a Skyhawk. It's sketch.
It's hard.
Those planes aren't supposed to go that high.
They're not. And I'm like in the back seat going...
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, basically we did a flyover of Area 51, legally.
How do you do it legally?
Before 9/11, the MOA, the military operating area, was much smaller. It was quite tight around Area 51.
Yeah, now it's huge. Now it's like half of Nevada.
You could fly the perimeter, like following along the squares, and you could look pretty much straight down into Area 51.
Yeah, you see aliens? You saw a ton of them, didn't you?
The tower contacted us.
Yeah.
They said, what's your destination?
That doesn't look like Area 51.
No, that's a good try, but... There
we go.
No, search for Groom Lake, Nevada. There you go. The tower contacted us and said, what's your destination? We said, Tonopah. He said, would you like us to give you a direct vector to Tonopah? Meaning, get the hell out of here.
Right.
But yes, after 9/11, you would no longer be able to do the trip that we did because they've expanded that and you can't get close enough to see it over the mountains.
No, as a matter of fact, you can't even get any, you have to really divert.
Go south. Keep going. There, that lake. Go a little bit. Go to, just about to the second O in Papoose. Zoom in on there. So this is about where Bob Lazar says that S4 is located. Do you see that road coming in? Actually, zoom out. He says it's hidden underground. Now, there's a lot of underground facilities that you can look at on Google Earth. Most notably Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado, the place from war games where NORAD used to be underneath the mountain. Mm-hmm. There's a tremendous amount of infrastructure outside of that to support an underground facility, air conditioning buildings and things like that have to exist. It's clear that there is none of that anywhere in this vicinity. There's a little 2-track right there. That faint road that you can barely see is a 2-track.
Well, that's unless the government, doctored these Google Earths up. So obviously,
but to build a facility, a giant underground hangar facility, would require a tremendous amount of construction. Mm-hmm. Construction leaves scars for centuries in the Nevada desert, and we can say quite confidently that there is no underground construction was ever done around here. And the people who all actually worked at Area 51 and flew the the Janet fleet of 737s, which is how they commuted to work every day. There was no other people on the plane that worked at a secret facility. It simply
They were flying there from Vegas, right?
It flew from Vegas. Yeah. There's simply no room for his story to have existed. Plus, it's ridiculous, and it's completely incompatible with everything that we know has happened at Groom Lake in its entire history. So and as you probably know, among the early things he said is, "Oh, I went to MIT," or whatever he claimed. He had a whole background.
He seems to be a pretty intelligent guy. Like, just listen to him articulate himself.
So there are a lot of articles on the internet written by physicists who give a physicist's breakdown of everything he's said. He doesn't know anything about what he's talking about.
Yeah, it turns out
he would not pass a first-year class in physics.
I wasn't that good in physics. So
Bob Lazar, I think, is a funny story because he's someone who came up with a goofy little idea to call into Art Bell on Coast to Coast one night, and it started to take over his life, and he's kind of been having to play defense ever since, keeping his finger in all the holes in the dike.
And Art Bell, the Coast to Coast AM
radio show,
I
think that's where he first surfaced.
Oh, okay. So he came in saying he saw aliens and then
I used to work at Area 51, reverse engineering.
So what do you think of Joe bringing him on the show and having that thing blow up?
Well, that was, I don't know if Joe had much to do with that. I mean, the documentary film had been produced about him. And
no, I think the documentary film didn't have anywhere near as much traction as Joe's show did with it.
Well, true, but nevertheless, there was a PR agency attached to it, and they're probably trying to get people to bring him on their shows. So, but Joe would have had him on anyway. I mean, he's going to have on interesting personalities no matter what. So.
Yeah.
I think the unfortunate thing is that people who don't understand anything about physics or who don't understand anything about the history of the Air Force are going to believe it.
Yeah.
And it's going to continue to erode the public intellect.
Yeah, well, there was a bunch of people on like September something all lined up ready to like invade Area 51 as a joke.
Yeah.
But it had like, I think it was like, what was it, 20 million people or something like that?
So zoom out. Oops.
Yep. That was bound to happen. I'm surprised it took this long.
Go to the top right and zoom out. Okay, you pause right about there. So you see where it says Alamo, that word over to the right? Yeah. That's about where the highway is. So to walk to Area 51, which is the people who are trying to storm Area 51, that's as close as you can get.
Oh, really?
Do you see the two mountain ranges you have to walk across?
It's a minor detail.
Yeah.
So they're gonna storm the mountains.
That would not have worked too well in their favor.
They all showed up though. Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, I really appreciate you coming on the show, man. This has been a blast. Learned a lot. Got to understand why Bigfoot's real. The whole vaxxing, 5G. People understand that Russians are behind a bit of that.
And we dipped our finger in a lot of things. And,
and it was absolutely great. And so where can people tune in and listen to you?
So my podcast is called Skeptoid, which the title of which I hate, but nevertheless, that's what it's been for 13 years now. You'll find it on the front page of iTunes Science section or Social Sciences. Skeptoid.com, which is to go there directly, and enjoy. It's a weekly show. The show's only 12 to 15 minutes long. Each one is a single subject. So the nice thing about that is you can say, oh, here's the show on vaccines, and you can share that show with your friends. You don't have to listen to a bunch of other stuff or scroll to a time index or anything. It's a lot of fun. I just thoroughly enjoy doing it. I'm the luckiest person in the world to get to do it for a living.
Yeah. And how many downloads have you had?
So interestingly, that's changed a lot in the last few months since Apple released Mac OS and iOS new version updates that threw everything into kilter, and all podcast stats have just been absolutely crazy. We typically have anywhere from 125 to 150,000 listeners a week.
125 to 150,000 listeners a week.
Yeah.
And you guys, it's filmed right here, or shot or recorded
right here in Bend, Oregon. Yeah, this is our permanent headquarters now. We're looking to build a studio and increase our video output. We're super stoked to be here. It's a fantastic town with a huge local talent pool.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And I've listened to it, and it's a fantastic show done in a short amount of time with very good audio and effects and everything. You do a really great job.
Well, thank you very much.
So thanks again, Brian. Appreciate it.
Thank you.